Right, could we come to order, please? And could I start the proceedings with apologies for absence? Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest in matters before us this evening? No. In which case, could I ask that Cabinet approve the minutes of the last Cabinet meeting? Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you. And just to confirm that items of business marked Part 1 will be considered in public, and items of business marked Part 2 will be in private. Reports 5 to 10 are public reports, and 11 to 15 are private reports. The first item of business before us this evening, agenda item 5, the Council Budget 2021 Revenue and Capital Month 7 Budget Monitoring Report. Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Leader. However, before I start on that, I think it would be appropriate to waste a couple of moments of the public and this Cabinet's time by formally acknowledging that this is your last Cabinet meeting as Leader. You may be here in some other capacity in the future, but this will be your last Cabinet meeting as Leader. And I think it's a significant event that we should acknowledge and congratulate you on, as it's now over 20 years. And that is no mean achievement. And I think our residents will join me in saying that where we are now as a borough and where we were then are two very different places, and a lot of that change is entirely down to you. Things were very different 20 years ago. Most of us can't remember it. Some of us weren't born, but too many of us were, and we certainly weren't suffering the way this year has gone. The year 2000 had its trials for different reasons. I remember the beginning of the year where everybody was concerned that their computers were going to fall over at as midnight struck on the year 2000, and the only thing that fell over was the performance in the Millennium Dome. And it was in July that year that you stepped up, and of course we celebrated in this July, somewhat remotely, unfortunately, that anniversary in your case. And now we've moved forward, and your great service has been acknowledged by the arrival of your knighthood, which is again a great honour, not only to you but to us, I believe, really as well, because it is a recognition of how much you've achieved. And now you've decided to, quite rightly, I think, deserve to chuck the towel in. And I'm sure we all wish you every success. And you've left us with a fantastic legacy that whoever moves forward and takes over this job will be starting from a very good place. So I would like to record on my own behalf, but I'm sure everybody in this room would agree with me, our heartfelt thanks and our good wishes to the future. Yeah. And just in case somebody else might want to speak, I'll withdraw for the moment.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, wholeheartedly endorse what Councillor Bianco has said, and I remember quite a lot of the things that we've gone through in the last 20 years, but I'm going to keep my remarks down to the consultants that we brought in early in your reign, who basically gave us two messages. You have a political problem which you're going to have to resolve, and you've got an officer problem which we can help you resolve, insofar as that the approach and the attitude and the can-do just wasn't there. And I think it is those two defining factors at that early stage where we worked out what the issues were, and you very strongly led to make sure that we got an officer team which is now recognised as one of the best in local government in terms of serving our residents. And we also didn't do too badly on dealing with our political problem called the Liberals.
Thank you. No, I think you're absolutely right about the staff, but the best councils attract the best staff, and we managed to go up the league table as a council, and like football teams, we now attract the best players, and so we go from strength to strength. Okay, back to business, Councillor Bianco.
Sorry, Leader. Sorry for that small diversion. Anyway, more good news. The capital. This is, as you said a few moments ago, the council budget for month 7, and month 7 is October, and it shows a further improvement, and shows that the net in-year underspend is now in excess of 3.2 million. And that means the unallocated reserves are projected to top 31 million at the end of the council year, i.e. the 31st of March. This is extremely sound financial position to be in. And separately, the COVID pressures have been identified separately. There's just over 31 million now of COVID pressures, which have been funded by specific government grants, and since we last met, that grant position has improved, and we have in dedicated reserves over 9 million to deal with any particular further pressures that are not funded coming forward. So it's a very good position to find ourselves in. There are 5 recommendations on the sheet at the bottom of page 9 and on top of page 10, and there is a further recommendation in respect of this thing, recommendation 6 on the front page of the addendum sheet. And I so move at this stage, as I know, Leader, you'll want to say a few words.
Thank you, Councillor Bianco. As you say, a very sound position to be in at month 7, which will carry into the next year's budget, which we'll be discussing shortly. The 6 recommendations, if I just may refer to them individually. Recommendation 1 is to note the budget position of October 2020, which is month 7, as outlined in Table 1. Table 1 is on page 14 of the report, and the salient point is that the forecast outturn, as you've mentioned, shows balances of 31,184,000. There are not many, certainly our neighbouring boroughs would not even have a third of that. General fund balances will be 31,000, and that's 3.2 million higher than anticipated when the budget strategy for the current year was agreed in February of this year. Recommendation 2 is to note the Treasury Management Update as of October 2020, Appendix E on page 60, and again the salient points there are to note that we comply with the Treasury rules, Prudential Code, no issues. The recommendation 3 is to continue to delegate the authority to myself and the Chief Executive regarding appointments of agency and consultancy assignments where it totals over 50k, and they are as detailed in Appendix F at page 62. Recommendation 4 is to approve acceptance of gift funding in relation to planning performance agreement for 2 schemes. One is Keith House, the eastern site in Hayes, 32,000. One is the Hillingdon Hospital redevelopment at £80,000. Recommendation 5 is to agree that the Council donates £50,000 to the Mayor of Hillingdon's Charitable Trust to support the Mayor's charitable work. The paragraph 4 explains that the COVID crisis has a good number of additional costs for the Council, but certain things, travel expenses, office expenses, printing and stationery, are down because a lot of people are working at home. So we have managed to save some base budget funding in the current year, and as the Mayor is unable to run as many fundraising events as it would normally be possible in an ordinary year, I think it's reasonable that we consider supporting the Mayor's charity so that the COVID plus goes some way to negate the COVID minus, if that makes sense. And the 6th recommendation, which is the addendum sheet, this says the Cabinet ratify an emergency decision by the Leader of the Council taken on the 7th of December to grant a temporary licence to the NHS North West London Clinical Commissioning Group to use the Winston Churchill Hall in Ruislip as a COVID-19 vaccination centre. There are a number of our premises that we have said they can use as vaccination centres, and this will come more and more now that the vaccine is online, and they want a decision almost immediately, so it has to be done under emergency powers and reported back. I think that says enough about the situation to have this amount in balances, plus, as Councillor Bianco said, £9 million set aside to carry forward against COVID pressures. At the moment, the funding from the government appears to cover the funding pressures that we have. So we've got £9 million on top of that, in case the government support isn't as generous going forward. We've got our own backstop, if you like. But even behind the backstop is the further backstop of £31 million in balances. So a really sound position. Are there any comments? If not, are the recommendations agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item B, which is the Cabinet's report on the budget. Medium-term financial forecast 2021-22, 2025-26. Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Leader. Well, this is the budget that, or this at least is the draft budget. I suppose it would be more appropriate to say that will go before Council in February at the budget sitting meeting. Usually it is has been my role to make that budget speech. This year it's difficult to say. But what I can say here and now is that this is, we set this out at this stage obviously because there needs to be a whole consultation process to go through, and that needs to take its course, and obviously involves a certain amount of time to give people the pressure. So that is why the draft budget appears here. But it's probably, it's undoubtedly the case that when we see the actual budget in February, it will largely reflect this, but there will undoubtedly be changes between now and then as things develop and as we get from government more information along the way. Nonetheless, this shows a good position. It shows a planned 4.8% increase in council tax, which is made up of two elements. The first is a basic core council tax increase of 1.8% out of a maximum of 2% possible, a 90% charge, therefore, reflecting really the fact that our neighbouring boroughs will undoubtedly go to the maximum. And then this year a 3% increase relating to the adult social care precept, which previously the government has capped at 2%. It is a sound budget that will provide what we need to deliver the services that this borough's residents expect and are rightly entitled to. There are 5 recommendations on page 2 and a further recommendation, item 6, on page 2 of the addendum pack. And at this point I think I will move the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Bianco. I'd refer Cabinet to paragraph 6. If you look at that particular paragraph, the Chancellor confirmed in the spending review that the government's threshold on council tax will be maintained at 2% level, and the social care precept will be increased from 2 to 3% for 21-22. The social care precept level has been increased by 1% from 2 to 3 because of the exceptional pressures being experienced within social care arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's clear that that extra 1% is intended for that purpose. And for the avoidance of doubt, in Hillingdon, we will add that additional amount to the COVID reserve that we've already got of 9.1 million and make it 10.3 million. So in next year's budget, we would have 10.3 million as the COVID reserve. I think, again, table 1, which I think is on page 5, shows the general level of closing balances that we've got for the years ahead of us. starting with the 31 million that we are predicting to have at the end of March. There will be some use of balances. Our savings targets have been affected by the COVID pandemic, so we will be using some balances. But at this point, we are predicting still 27.7 million by 2023-24. Now that is a reasonable amount of balances to have. On top of which, of course, we've got 10.3 million for any COVID pressures. Now, the recommendations 1 to 5 are the standard recommendations that come with the budget proposal. The addendum sheet is required because this year we are not going to have the council tax frozen for the over 65s. Now, there's no other local authority in the country that's frozen council tax for the over 65s for 14 years. I don't think there's any councils doing it for 2 years, never mind 14 years. But I know that residents will realise that we need to be cautious this year and build reserves to allow us to deal with the economic effect of the COVID pandemic. So this year we are saying we will not be giving a discount. What this is doing, this additional addendum, and I'll read this to you. If you look at the revised paragraph 38 and paragraph 39, the Older People's Discount Scheme was set up and funded for the first 12 years from within the base budget, funded through service efficiencies. When the scheme was first set up, the council also put further efficiency savings into an earmarked reserve in case it was required to fund the scheme. This earmarked reserve was not required, and accordingly in 2019-20 and 2021, years 13 and 14 of the scheme was drawn down to support the scheme. In the current year, the scheme cost is projected to total 1.726 million, which would rise to just over 2 million if we continued it into next year. However, given the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, it is proposed that the scheme be discontinued. However, it is proposed that the cash discounts for those households already in receipt of the discount during 2021 financial year will be maintained going forward, ensuring they continue to receive the same level of financial support they currently do, although their bill will go up this year. So, in actual fact, if you've had 14 years discount, you keep the 14 years discount, but this year you have to pay the rise that everybody has got. So you've got that lower council tax on your property until you move out of it, basically. So hopefully that makes sense. Any funding costs attributable to that will be funded out of earmarked reserves and have no effect on our balances. I apologise for the confusion on this in the original report. It's something that we always intended to maintain that past OAP's discount, but this year we've had to deal with an inordinate amount of financial information coming from the government due to the COVID effects. And I would ask at this stage the Director of Finance, who's here tonight, to take the thanks of Cabinet back to his staff for the terrific work they've been doing in dealing with the financial side of COVID and trying to put this budget together at the same time. It is quite a remarkable job. In these unprecedented times, Hillingdon remains financially sound and far better than most to deal with the challenges that lay ahead of us. The bulk of this budget will be discussed at Council in February, but all the services that we provided will continue to be provided. The one thing that is not included, that's been there before, is a first-time buyers scheme, which has now been replaced by government schemes. But our budget principles of any increase in our fees and charges will be benchmarked against our neighbours, and our residents will only pay 90% at most of what our neighbouring boroughs pay. All those budget principles remain and go forward. Are there any other comments? If not, are the recommendations 1 to 6 agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 7, grants to Hillingdon's local voluntary organisations for 2021-22. Councillor Mills.
Thank you. I refer to the 4 recommendations on page 66, which make up the variety of grants that we give under our voluntary sector grants schemes, including the annual contribution that we make to the London Council's grants, where we continue to be more of a contributor than a beneficiary, but that I think is one of the inevitabilities of being where we are geographically as well. Broadly speaking, the COVID has obviously had a major impact on a lot of the voluntary work that has normally gone on across the borough, but there are many organisations that have continued to adapt and to carry on providing a service to our various parts of the community, and we as a council wish to continue to be seen to be supporting them through this grants programme. And whilst there are some changes to 1 or 2 organisations because of their circumstances, there are some new entrants who have come to the fore who we are giving some support to for the first time, which is listed in the report. And there's many an organisation that's been on the list for a number of years who we continue to support, as on balance we believe that they continue to add value to our local community in the work in which they do. Included in the report, which people get a chance to read, you will also see that 1 or 2 organisations have taken the opportunity to think collectively and to come together in terms of providing services, and that's something which we welcome and are willing to support. And I think that remains one of the challenges going forward for the next few years, that all voluntary organisations need to just take a step back, even when hopefully COVID is no more than a chapter in our history, and think about how best they can go forward, and whether they go forward alone or in partnership with other parts of the community sector that exist in Hillingdon. And I personally think that there is a lot of mileage and a lot of benefit for some of those organisations to think strategically along those lines, as the challenges will continue to grow. But I move the recommendations, page 66.
Are those recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 8, referral from council, war memorials, wall-mounted World War I triptych, St Martin's Church, West Drayton. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Leader. I speak this evening in 2 capacities, that of the Cabinet Member with responsibilities for all things related to heritage, and also as a Senior Reserve Military Officer. This report comes before the Cabinet as a result of the motion to Council on the 10th of September, when Councillor Sweeting totally incorrectly implied in her motion that Hillingdon Council was being disrespectful of those who had made the ultimate sacrifice of their lives in World War I. That is so far from the truth and still terribly annoys me. As a result, I'm afraid I need to proffer a rather fulsome response this evening and set out a full chronology of what happened and why. Hillingdon Council, under this Conservative administration for the last 20 years, has encouraged and supported the military by signing the Military Covenant, conserving and preserving the Battle of Britain bunker, and building an adjacent visitor centre, conserving the Polish War Memorial and the military sections within our cemeteries. We've donated a gate guardian to RAF Northolt and have very close ties there. We have funded travel for veterans to go to the D-Day landing commemorations in France and commemorated the anniversaries of the First World War, D-Day, Dunkirk, VE and VJ days in our libraries and at the Battle of Britain bunker. We developed a work programme to clean and maintain all memorials as long ago as 2008. In 2010, we tasked a planning specialist team to develop policies for the protection of all the borough's war memorials. The team appointed a research volunteer to carry out this work, with the goal of highlighting the importance of memorials and their locations across Hillingdon. The research took 6 months and involved searching carefully through the Imperial War Museum's register, working with the local archives team, and going carefully through the books of local historian Tanya Britton. The researcher found several Imperial War Museum records that were incomplete, incorrect, and in some cases duplicated. The truth is, historians are always updating and correcting records as new information comes to light. At the same time, we published an article in Hillingdon People asking residents to let us know of any less well-known or unusual memorials in the borough, but sadly received not a single reply, not even one from Councillor Sweeting about the memorial in St Martin's Church in West Drayton. At this stage, the council created an online gazetteer and printed and distributed widely, free of charge, A5 booklets of the gazetteer. Subsequent revisions and updates were made in both 2011 and 2012. In 2014, to commemorate the sacrifice of local men who had fought and died in World War I, we printed and published a very high-quality book called We Will Remember Them, using the information held at the time on the online gazetteer. 75 memorials were recorded in the borough, of which 21 were publicly accessible and the balance owned by associations, sports clubs and private companies. John Davies, a local historian, soon after the publication of We Will Remember Them, pointed out the omission of the World War I close wall mounted Roll of Honour triptych in St Martin's Church in West Drayton. This was soon added to the online gazetteer, as was further information about the church's World War II Book of Remembrance. Towards the end of 2017, the Imperial War Museum updated its War Memorial Register, and we were able to add a further 10 memorial entries across the borough onto the online gazetteer that you can see listed on page 171 in Appendix 1. In 2017, we appointed and made the long-term commitment to use conservation-accredited contractors to maintain, tend, and report annually on the condition of all the memorials in our care. According to Councillor Sweeting, Hillingdon Council had insulted and forgotten the memory of those who fell and are commemorated on the triptych in St Martin's in West Drayton. Councillor Sweeting is so far off the mark on this one, as I honestly think we have done far more than any other London borough to honour and maintain the memory of the lives and names of those who fell in both world wars. Accordingly, I totally reject Councillor Sweeting's insulting assertions that we have, or ever will forget them, added to which we have updated the gazetteer with the 2 from St Martin's and 10 other memorials from other wards distributed across the borough that her mention by selecting just one memorial omission was, to my mind, the worst form of political grandstanding aimed completely to raise her profile within her residents' minds. We have before us 4 recommendations, which are to reprint the A5 gazetteer booklet with the extra 12 memorials across the borough, and to publish an article in Hillingdon People about the 12 memorials, which will ask for help to identify any further unrecognised borough memorials. And then, finally, to print a loose-leaf insert page for the We Will Remember Them book that has the 12 further memorials on it, as well as any more that come to light as a result of the article in Hillingdon People. It's at this point, Leader, that I move the recommendations to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, as you say, I never mind London boroughs, I don't know of any other council across the country that has done what we have done. We started a programme of cleaning all our memorials, recutting them where they were necessary. We, again in Hillingdon People, put out the message if anybody had any relatives who weren't on the memorial for either World War I or II, would they come forward. And I personally attended a church where a Spitfire pilot, there wasn't a local memorial, but they put a plaque in the church. A number of memorials were recut with the correct names on them and a few names added. It's something that we hold dear in this borough. We don't forget those who served and defended this country over the years. This is what Councillor Lewis referred to as a gazetteer, and this is the We Will Remember Them book. This was given free to every household in the borough that had somebody on one of their relatives on that World War I memorial anywhere in the borough. Now, Hillingdon Council did a really good job, but like the Imperial War Museum, we couldn't get them all, and we did ask in Hillingdon people if there were any that were tucked away, and there are across the country. In factories, there were memorials to fallen members of staff. In churches, there were memorials that were tucked away, not a stone sort of monument. It might be just a plaque that something had been placed over the years. And there are a number that came to light, but there's no disrespect for the people around St John the Baptist Church, where the altar bears the name of 3 members of a family killed in World War I. Now, why are we not taking the same sort of stance? Oh, this is terrible for the people of that ward. No, it isn't. There's no disrespect. As soon as we are made aware of it, we will correct the situation. We will, as you say, put this in a forthcoming edition of Hillingdon People to just try again. There may still be some more out there, almost certainly are, and we will update this from time to time to make sure that we do remember those that have fallen in the defence of what we hold to be dear in this country. But I think you are absolutely right to say it was entirely due to there being no knowledge of this particular memorial's existence, and not as been suggested because those that had died had been forgotten. That is quite an outrageous thing to say, and that will not be the case in Hillingdon, and I'm sure it wasn't the case of the residents of West Drayton. They genuinely didn't know it was there any more than the council officers at the time did either. So, are the recommendations agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 9, Statement of Licensing Policy. Councillor Mills.
The licensing policy went out for consultation to ensure that it was as relevant as it needs to be with current changes that have occurred recently over legislation and good practice. And as a result of that consultation and the response from a number of consultees, a revised licensing policy statement has been prepared, which is attached in this report. And I move the recommendation on page 173, which is that we should adopt this by recommending that it goes to full council, which is the actual body that has the final say on whether this indeed will be our policy on licensing going forward. I move.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 10, the Planning Obligations Quarterly Financial Monitoring Report. Councillor Burrows.
Yes, thank you, Leader. This is our usual quarterly report we get on the 106 and 278 agreements. The council currently hold 15.4 million. Of this, 3.8 is allocated or earmarked to projects already. 3.8 relates to funds that the council holds but currently unable to spend directly, leaving the residual balance of 7.6 that is currently spendable but not allocated towards any specific project as yet. In quarter 2, the council has received additional income of 341k, and of this we've spent 237 already. We are starting to see this 106 and 278 monies increase again as contractors start to get back to work with the COVID situation. I will say to my fellow Cabinet colleagues, the A3 sheets you have, please look at your portfolios. If there is anything on there that you think you want better clarification on, then please contact me and the officers and we will be able to provide that. So with that said, Leader, I move the recommendation at the top of page 234 that Cabinet notes the update currently with 106 and 278 monies.
Thank you, Councillor Burrows. Is So no comments, is that agreed? Thank you. We now move to part 2 of the agenda.